A huge white castle with blue roofs disappeared into the mountains behind the forest. Moonlight reflected off the peaks on the tops of the roofs. In one of the rooms of the castle, a man sighed wearily and put his head on a stack of papers standing on the table. The old man had a gray beard on his face and glasses on the bridge of his nose. The man wondered what he should do, because the people will soon begin to starve, and the Duke does not care and he does not try to prevent it in any way. Suddenly, a huge fiery comet flew into the castle. From the noise and the flash, the old man got up from the table and looked out the window opposite him. He watched in horror as people fled in panic in different directions, and some of the wounded fell to the ground and lay in a pool of their blood. Unknown knights in protective helmets covering their face with swords attacked civilians and killed them. The old man realized in horror that these were the knights of the Imperial Army. A huge gray-haired old man with a long beard and a crown on his head ominously watched what was happening. A crowd of magicians stood on the walls of the fence protecting the castle, raised their hands to the sky and began to recite some spells. The old man recognized the main magician as Emperor Zeron and called him a dirty bastard. Another dozen comets flew at the castle again. The old man ran to the Duke. He stood on the highest roof and watched what was happening. The old man began to beg his head to escape from the roof as soon as possible. At that moment, one of the shells hit the castle tower. The next comet flew into the old man's room. The last thing he shouted was for the Duke. That's how the land of Bran fell. A useless piece of land on the outskirts of the Empire. Suddenly, a young guy with bright red hair jumped out of bed. Along with the Empire, the main character, the butler of the local Duke, also died. Looking in the mirror, the man saw a young handsome guy. He realized that he should have died, but he was reborn into the body of a young Duke 20 years before the death of the Earth. A whole day has passed since the old man was reborn into the body of Duke Aaron. The guy was sitting on the bed clutching his head with his hands, being in a broken state and complete misunderstanding of what was happening. He did not eat or drink anything. I didn't talk to anyone. The main character spent the second day cursing the Emperor, who killed him and all the inhabitants of Bran. The main character fell asleep and woke up delirious, wondering how to take revenge on him. On the third day, the old man finally calmed down, gathered his strength, got out of bed, got dressed, because he realized that he had a chance to change everything. Then he had to dig into books to find out everything about the Duke in his early years. The old man was determined to prevent the impending horror, and a few days later, the main character was forced to stop a severe hunger. The old man was holding a whole loaf of bread in his hands, clutching it in his hands and looking at it carefully. He thought that while he had spent his whole life for the benefit of the poor, who could not even afford a piece of bread, the Duke had never cared about anyone but himself, as if those people were not his subjects. A girl with red hair in a beautiful pink dress and a black rim in her hair flew into the room. She began to shout in fear at the main character, asking why he was clutching a loaf of bread in his hands. This girl was Cheryl, Aaron's younger sister and a former imperial princess. She said that she spent so much time to get the guy out of the room so that he wouldn't get hungry, and he doesn't eat and does strange things with food. The guy laughed, apologized to the girl and said that he was doing it just because it would be more convenient to chew bread. But the guy's face showed that he was panicking and trying not to give himself away. Then he asked the girl if she was free today, as he wanted to go to the same place with her. The girl with contempt and distrust asked her brother about where he wanted to take her. The main character, along with his sister and a bodyguard, were standing on the street. The man reported to Aaron for the work done. He said that by order of the Duke, he was engaged in providing their food. This man was Rommel, a swordsman who is the unofficial captain of the knights. The man asked why the Duke had called him to this place in full armor. In response, Aaron replied that Emperor Zeron was planning to destroy their land. Hearing this, Rommel and Cheryl were horrified and could not believe their ears. The girl began to talk about the fact that the Emperor, who was also her uncle, had sworn an oath to their father, which he would not benefit from breaking. In response to this, Aaron replied that the Emperor probably thinks that they will want to exercise their right to the throne. On top of everything else, he added that he had personally been informed that the Emperor was planning to break his promise. After a short pause, Aaron said that he thought it was time to use the dragon's blessing. Aaron's sister looked askance at Rommel and told her brother that he was going to hide the blessing of the dragon as an ace up his sleeve until the last. Aaron said that to the last did not include the betrayal of the Emperor. After that, he asked his sister and the knight if they were ready to move out. Cheryl thought it was a strange decision, but her brother never let words go to waste, and therefore she trusted him. The girl picked up her staff, at the end of which was an imitation of a flower. She pointed this staff forward. The crystal inside the flower lit up and blue energy began to radiate from it. Because of this, a portal opened that led to some other dimension. Suddenly, in a panic, Rommel called out to Mrs. Cheryl. The girl turned around and looked questioningly at the knight. It turns out that, unofficially, Cheryl was a magician, but Rommel did not know about it and therefore was very surprised. She remembered that she hadn't told the man about it and smiled. After entering the portal, all three found themselves on a snow-covered mountain in frosty lands. After that, the girl stopped, began to stretch her arms, still holding her red magic staff in her hands. The men stood behind Cheryl. The girl asked them not to judge her harshly, as she had not practiced for a long time. After that, the girl raised her hand with her palm to the sky and a lump of fire came out of it into the sky. This ball became bigger and took the shape of eyes and mouth. The girl at this moment began to swing the staff. The fire began to change its shape, and then completely divided into several small balls. Rommel, who was watching this, realized in shock that the ring of Inferno was in front of him. After that, with a wave of Cheryl's hand, the ring turned into a huge ball of fire again and crashed into the mountains, leaving behind a large footprint. Rommel stared in shock at the dent left in the mountain. Cheryl turned back towards the men and said it was weak, just above the 7th circle. In shock, Rommel asked the girl if he understood correctly that she was a magician of the 7th circle. The girl answered positively, but suggested that it would be too little to defeat the Emperor's army. Aaron cleared his throat to clear his throat and said that it really wouldn't be enough. He also added that they have a lot of time to gain strength. But in fact, the man was thinking that in Aaron's diary it was said that the girl is a magician of the 5th circle, but in fact she is an archmage. After that, Cheryl added that compared to her brother, what she does is toys. Rommel, still in shock, turned towards the Duke and asked him if his sister's words were true. Aaron smiled and said that now they will find out the answer to this question. The man was worried and gathered his strength to try magic. Yesterday afternoon, reading Aaron's diaries, the man found out that thanks to the blessing of the dragon, Aaron's sister became a magician of the 5th circle, and the Duke himself became a Grand Master warrior. In this case, it turns out that being in Aaron's body, the man also possesses this power. He got up from the table and went to the bookshelf. He took out a book called Fundamentals of Imperial Fencing and looked at it and thought that he was unlikely to become the best swordsman right away and he should start with the basics. Standing on a snowy mountain, the man picked up his sword, raised it to the sky and prepared to test his magic. He stepped forward, gripped the sword with both hands tighter, and the same blue energy as his sister began to emanate from it. Aaron shouted and announced the third version of the great sword art called Piercing Wind and waved the blade in the air. A wave of energy headed into the mountains opposite the man and cut off their tops. Pleased with himself, the man sheathed his sword and, smiling, mumbled and turned to Rommel and Cheryl. However, he thought to himself that he was actually aiming at another mountain, but he was also satisfied with this result. Rommel opened his mouth in shock and looked at the mountains. He couldn't believe his eyes. The dragon flew in the sky over the land of Bran. He realized that there was a trace of the blessing he had left here a few years ago in this city and was surprised by it. After that, the dragon flew down to the castle like a bullet. He landed on the ground and turned into an old man. He examined his body and called it a great vessel. Holding a black fan in his hands and waving it in front of his face, the man looked at the castle, hiding behind the trees in the forest. He decided it was time for him to meet the people he had once blessed. A few days before the old man decided to become a duke, he found Aaron's diary in the library. Opening the thin binding, he began to read it. A few years ago, with the help of the feudal lord, Aaron's father's brother, Uncle Jaron, took away the right to the throne from Aaron's weakened old father. And soon the father of the family died, so Aaron and Cheryl had to escape from the persecution of the authorities. The reason why the brother and sister were able to survive was in the only condition that their father put forward to his brother in order to protect his children. The condition stated that Aaron and Cheryl would not claim the throne, and on this basis the emperor should allow Aaron to become the duke of the land of Bran at the edge of the empire. Bran's land was a barren land with a decrepit fortress on it. Hundreds of scary monsters fled to the lands. Nothing grew on that land, and monsters were constantly attacking. Thanks to the dragon's blessing, Cheryl and Aaron wield the power of the Grand Master. They have enough strength to establish life on the land of Bran. But Aaron decided to hide his abilities for the rest of his life in order to keep the promise made by his father. Having finished reading the diary, the main character closed the thin book. The old man was angry with the Duke because some promise was more precious to him than the lives of his subjects, whom he refused to save during the Emperor's attack. Currently, in the fortress of the land of Bran, a stranger grabbed the hand of a boy. He used some abilities on it, after which the boy realized that his arm no longer hurts. He looked at his healer with surprise. She was a beautiful tall girl with white hair and a purple robe. She told the boy to play more carefully in the future, otherwise his parents would worry. The boy said he would follow the girl's advice. The healer turned out to be a girl named Cecilia, 21 years old, and was a saint of the Vivian Order. She bent down to the boy, stroked his head, and called him a good and smart boy. Suddenly, the herald announced that everyone should gather in the square in order to listen to the Duke, who was going to make a speech. The girl turned at the sound and walked towards the square. The Duke was standing on a high stone. There were guards behind him. Aaron himself looked at the people of his land and stood facing them. People in the crowd were talking and could not understand what he needed and what kind of speech he was going to say now. They thought that the Duke would talk some nonsense again and maybe even raise taxes, which angered and upset the population. Someone from the crowd asked the other men if they had heard how much the Duke had changed lately. Another replied that he had heard that he had found all the knights who took the roof from people and severely punished them. People were obviously not happy about the gathering in the square and could not understand what the Duke wanted from them, because they thought that he would starve them again. The old man thought that, in general, he was not surprised by such a reaction of the people, because they did not know anything yet and were used to old Aaron, who did not perform his duties at all. The man began to say that intelligence had reported to him that the number of orcs had increased dramatically and they were trying to take away their lands. He also added that if these creatures surround the castle, then the people of the land of Bran will no longer be able to receive food. Aaron urged people not to just sit back and wait for death. The people whispered again that the orcs had been doing such things for years and were surprised that their duke had just found out about it. People have already become disappointed again because they thought that their head would say something new and serious. Aaron asked the people if they were going to continue to be victims of these green-skinned orcs or if they would go with their leader to fight for their lives. The people were shocked. They didn't understand why their duke would say that, where he got it from and what he was going to fight for. After that, Aaron announced that being the lord of these people and the owner of the lands, Bran gives a new decree that they will no longer sit in a blind defense against the orcs and from now on they are declared invaders. The people were at a loss and did not understand what invaders meant. Aaron continued his inspiring speech and asked his people how much longer they were going to endure the oppression of the orcs. How much longer will they watch monsters live richer than humans? After this phrase, the people rebelled because they were outraged that some green-skinned orcs live richer than them, working peasants. Aaron smiled at the fact that people fell for his trick and was delighted with the reaction of people. He reiterated that the orcs live richer than humans and said that he and his people are going to overthrow the orcs so that they all become rich. The people began to chant, "Cut the greenskins, more gold." It was clear that Aaron's speech and the promise of riches inspired people. Among the crowd, there was also a dragon in the body of an old man. He was also wearing a robe and hiding his identity behind it. The dragon looked at Aaron and could not believe that the person standing in front of him had received his blessing. The dragon smiled and thought that he did not want to stay in these lands for a long time. But this young man has potential. With the help of magic, the dragon formed some kind of parchment scroll in his hand. Some time later, Aaron was shouting at his subordinate. He was talking about the fact that yesterday he ordered him to buy everything. He asked about why the subordinate didn't even buy 100 sets of armor. The old man asked about the fact that the expedition might fail, but Aaron stood his ground. Then the old man asked what would happen if she still failed, to which Aaron replied that then he would take responsibility. The old man was indignant that if he bought so much armor and the mission failed, then they would have no money left at all and there would be nothing to eat. Aaron in a rage held the old man by his clothes and shouted at him. Then he let him go and they both stood and looked at each other with anger. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. The old man replied that the person who knocked on the door should get out, but Aaron ordered him to enter. The man opened the door and told the duke that a man from Duke Rhaenon had come to see him. Both Aaron and the old man stood in confusion and looked at the messenger. A dragon in the guise of an old man entered the room. He bowed and greeted the duke. The old man held a scroll in his hands and handed it to the duke. He introduced himself by the name of Kinus and said that he had arrived on the recommendation of Duke Rhaenon. Aaron, surprised, took the scroll from Kinus' hands and asked him again if he really came on Duke Rhaenon's personal recommendation. For himself, Aaron thought about the fact that last time Kinus introduced himself as a strategist, but left them a year later. Aaron was pleasantly surprised to see Kinus and noted that his appearance is hard to forget. Aaron unfolded the scroll and began to read it. In it, Duke Rhaenon was addressing Aaron. He wrote that it had been 3 years since the man settled on the lands of Bran and there was not a day when he would not be unpleasant to remember that Aaron constantly has to fight for existence in this hell. Then there were a few more lines of text, after which it was said that this time the Duke had sent him his promising strategist and some gold for the treasury. Duke Rhaenon also expressed his wishes that he hopes that Kinus will serve Aaron well in the next 3 years, and he and Aaron will meet again someday. After finishing reading the scroll, Aaron thought about how Duke Rhaenon was loyal to the late emperor. But suddenly it dawned on Aaron that the scroll mentioned gold. He asked Kinus about it. The eyes of the old man with whom Aaron was arguing a few minutes ago immediately lit up from such news and the mention of money. Kinus laughed softly, waving his fan in his face, and said that Duke Rhaenon had sent 50,000 gold. The old treasurer exhaled and said that he understood such a sum, because Duke Rhaenon was also going through hard times. Aaron turned to the old man and told him not to complain, because with this money you can buy enough equipment and even spend the rest to clean up the city. The old man asked his duke about what he meant by the phrase clean up the city. He replied that this was an investment for the future, because it was unprofitable for their land to keep gold in the treasury and it was better to invest this money in something worthwhile. The old man looked at his duke with complete incomprehension as he continued to speak with an intelligent look. Aaron said that if cities are not cleaned up, frequent outbreaks of diseases will begin and then they will lose the most important resource, which is people. The duke also added that the fewer people they have, the more difficult the distribution of forces will be and in the end it will lead to the collapse of the castle. The dragon, listening to Aaron's speech, mentally noticed that his logic was not entirely correct, but it was much more important that his train of thought was going in the right direction. Because few people think as far as Aaron does, and even fewer people remember about hygiene and cleanliness of the city. Maybe Aaron will be suitable for the role of caretaker of the dragon's nest. At this time, the old man left the room and told the duke to do what he wanted because he was quitting. The old man left the room slamming the door and Eren was left alone with Kinus. Eren looked at the man and was glad that now he had a strategist at his disposal from Duke Raynon himself, and he was already going to memorize strategy textbooks. Very timely, Kinus got to Eren's castle. The Duke turned to Kinus and said that although he was recommended by Duke Raynon, but Kinus probably understands perfectly well that Eren cannot immediately put him as the chief strategist, because the people and the subjects may rebel because of this. Kinus bowed his head and agreed with Eren's words. After that, the Duke continued to speak. He said that based on this, he would be very happy if Kinus showed his skills well in the upcoming campaign against the orcs, and then, in case of victory and success, Eren would be able to appoint him chief strategist without any problems. The Duke asked Kinus what he thought about this. The dragon covered his face with his fan again and agreed with the Duke. He said he would be happy to help Eren in the upcoming campaign. In his mind, the dragon thought that a pathetic person dares to doubt his abilities. He was amused and even interested. Eren summed it up and said he was relying on Kinus. The man thought to himself that if everything goes well, then he will work with this strategist for the next 3 years, which is quite a long time. The dragon replied that he would not let the Duke down and thought that the better he got to know this man, the more entertaining he would become for the dragon. Suddenly, Eren added that his goal after the war with the orcs would be dungeon development. The dragon was surprised and even a little horrified by such a statement. He asked Eren again about what he meant and whether Kinus understood him correctly. A week later, the army of the Bran lands stood in large numbers and fully armed in front of their commander-in-chief, Duke Eren. The Duke said he hoped all the warriors had already learned their strategy by heart. Eren asked if anyone needed to explain everything again. The warriors remained silent in response. Eren was satisfied with this answer and he said that the army was going on an expedition today. Eren shouted that they would definitely destroy the evil orcs and then get rich. The warriors liked this fighting spirit, so they raised their spears to the sky and began to shout. The gates of the protective wall of the lands of Bran opened and a huge army led by Eren headed to battle with the orcs. In the black forest of the land of Bran, Eren and Kinus stood on a mountain. They were watching the orc tribe. The leader of this tribe was called Kurok and he captured one citadel in order to build his nest there. Because of the orcs, all the food lines of the land of Bran were destroyed, and a few years later, just because of them, a massive famine began, which led to the death of most of the population. Eren decided that the problem needed to be cut down at the root, and that's exactly what he would do. Rommel came up to Eren and said that their squad had found kobold shooters. Eren asked the man about how many of these monsters. Rommel replied that they found 5 groups and in each of them about 5 or 6 orcs. Eren called his sister Cheryl. She came out of the tent and reluctantly approached her brother. He twirled his hand in the air and gestured to her what she should do. The girl, taking her magic staff, ran into the forest. There she created a fireball of the 3rd circle and said that this spell is on the 3rd circle, but hits at the level of the 5th. After that, she directed the ball towards the orc village. At this time, the monsters were talking in their own language and actively discussing something. Suddenly, they saw a fireball in the sky, which then fell next to them and set fire to the forest. The monsters scattered into different ones due to the explosion. Eren watched all this from that very mountain. He was not happy that his sister used some kind of 3rd circle power that hits like the 5th, as he asked her not to use the power above the 3rd circle in order not to attract the attention of the Emperor. The girl returned to her brother while he, covering his face with his hand, thought that if he had known that the girl would use spells stronger than piercing wind, then he would not have taken her with him today. Kinus, who was standing next to the Duke, said that the Emperor would sooner or later find out what Duke Eren was doing anyway, and even more so as long as the soldiers did not spread rumors. There should be no problems with this. Eren exhaled and agreed with the strategist, after which he asked him if he had found the right place. The man replied with full confidence that of course he had found what he needed. The day before the start of the campaign, Kinus, Eren, Rommel and Cheryl discussed the plan of action in one of the rooms of the castle. The dragon said that the best outcome of the war against monsters would be to destroy them before the start of a real war, so people don't have much choice. He also added that now the best strategy would be to take the enemies to a place convenient for them and destroy them there. Eren asked the strategist what he meant by a convenient place. The man replied that this was necessary in order to exclude large losses. Kinus also added that the orc tribe has about 2,000 monsters, and even if the people of the land of Bran win, the losses will still be incomparable because they have only 500 warriors. After that, Kinus said that everything else, since it is people who are attacking, then every move needs to be carefully calculated and planned. The man advised to lure out the orcs with the help of cavalry to begin with. Eren doubted that it was worth using 100 cavalrymen as bait for monsters, but Kinus convinced him that it was really necessary. Kinus added that since the speed will be on the side of the people, they will be able to ambush, and then, as soon as the orcs approach the forest, archers and shooters will have to destroy at least half of the enemy troops. Then, according to Kinus' plan, the humans would push them into the open and, with the help of heavily armed knights, surround them in order for them to surrender. Eren thought for a while, then said that the plan and strategy are excellent. After that, the Duke announced that they would proceed according to Kinus' plan. The monsters were trying to escape from the fire that Cheryl had set and escape from this place. Someone from the squad reported to Aaron that apparently the monsters had started moving. Kinus noticed that apparently these are not ordinary orcs, since they even have scouts. This means that the monsters will prepare for battle as soon as they sense something is wrong. After that, the man added that if this is the case, then why not make developed orcs their slaves? Aaron looked questioningly at Kinus. He continued his speech. He said that in his opinion, such a workforce would help the Duke's goal for dungeon development. Aaron was surprised at Kinus' insight and wit. The Duke admitted that the idea proposed by the man was really good, but doubted that monsters would obey a man. Aaron said that according to rumors, monsters only listen to the orders of ghosts and dragons. In response to this, Kinus laughed awkwardly and said that orcs are a species that obeys only superior strength, so it is not necessary to be a dragon at all. Aaron said he would deal with it later, as he did not want his greed to lead to big sacrifices. Kinus agreed to his order. Aaron asked the man if it was time to start their plan. He ordered his sister Cheryl to take 200 soldiers and take up positions in the forest. Aaron ordered Rommel to create an iron ring and an ambush. Both obeyed the Duke's order and took action. Aaron told Kinus to stay at the top of the hill and he also obediently agreed. Aaron signaled to his army and led them forward with him. At this time, the head of the orcs dined at his castle. A subordinate came running to him and reported that the people were going to attack them any minute. The trigger was angry at this news and asked about where these people came from. The subordinate replied that the people were attacking from the Black Forest. Huron called the people of Bran's land insects that were hiding behind stone walls and said that they had finally come out. The orc was sure that he would easily kill them all. Another orc ran out into the street and shouted that meat was coming to them. He called on other monster warriors to kill all the people and capture the castle. The warriors began to rejoice in agreement with the head. The trigger ordered the Minotaur to be released. The gate was opened and a huge monster Minotaur came out of it with an even bigger hammer in his hand. The beast roared very loudly into the sky. The trigger ordered his warriors to kill and loot. A huge and numerous army of orcs, led by their leader Kirk and the Minotaur as the main weapon, headed towards the people advancing on them. The sun was already setting below the horizon and was going to hide behind the mountains. A huge bird was flying over the forest when suddenly she heard a noise. Taking a closer look, the bird discovered that it was a huge army of orcs. It turned out that the eagle served the dragon and therefore he saw everything that the bird saw. The dragon decided that the time had come. At that moment, the army of the people of the land of Bran was running through the forest, led by Aaron. The Duke shouted to his men to prepare for a clash and raised his sword into the sky. Aaron shouted forward and the human army collided with the orc army. A brutal massacre began. 100 cavalrymen led by Duke Aaron fought against 2,000 orcs led by the monster Kurok. The battle began. Aaron realized that they were not acting strongly enough and needed to continue to crush the orcs. Suddenly, the man saw a huge axe in front of him and barely managed to hide his head from its blade. In front of Aaron stood a huge minotaur. The monster screamed so loudly that people had to cover their ears with their hands. Aaron shouted to his army not to be afraid of the Minotaur and ordered them to move on towards the orcs. People again went on the attack on the monsters. One of the orcs started attacking Aaron. The Duke had already raised his sword to strike, when he suddenly remembered Kinus' words that the orcs could become a good workforce that would help in the development of dungeons. After that, Aaron decided not to kill the orcs, but simply to push them out of his way. The Duke realized that they were in the Black Forest, just where they planned to exterminate the orcs. Aaron shouted to his soldiers that there were too many enemies and ordered his army to retreat. The orcs looked at the retreating people with incomprehension. They shouted to each other that the people were running away and they needed to run after them to kill them. Suddenly, a minotaur broke through the crowd of orcs and began to catch up with the army of people. One of the warriors ran up to the Duke and said that they were being followed. Aaron said he would deal with the minotaur and ordered the rest of the warriors to go behind the hill. The warriors continued to run forward while Aaron abruptly turned around and ran towards the minotaur. At this time, the minotaur was about to strike one of the warriors. Aaron ran and thought that he was not going to lose any of his soldiers. With these thoughts, he used his sword to repel the blow of the minotaur and his warrior remained alive. The minotaur flew to the side and fell to the ground. The warriors watched with admiration what Aaron had done. The man watched his subordinates and thought that he sort of ordered them to go over the hill, but they did not listen to him. Despite this, Aaron was glad that at least he didn't have to drag the minotaur alone, who was unconscious on the ground from the Duke's blow. Aaron ordered Arthur to tie up this monster and throw it away into the bushes. The man was surprised by such an order from his lord and asked Aaron if he was going to kill the monster. Aaron calmly replied that he would still need the minotaur, so he would not kill him. Arthur agreed with his lord and said he would do as he wished. Another warrior told his duke that the orcs were advancing. A crowd of monsters stood and looked at the people, intending to eat every single one. Suddenly, several dozen fireballs began to fall from the sky directly on the orc army. The shells fell to the ground and exploded. Aaron ordered his army to retreat, and he thought that his sister Cheryl was doing something that did not suit him, because it kills a lot of orcs. However, the trigger remained alive and was going to run after people to avenge his orc brothers. The warriors had already broken away from the explosion site, when suddenly the trigger and several orcs began to catch up with them. Suddenly, the monster running in front of the chicken rolled back on him like a bucket from the mountain. The orc didn't understand what was going on until he climbed further and found that in front of him was a wall of shields that people had built. The orcs looked at the people and realized that they couldn't do anything about it. Suddenly the shields parted and Aaron came out of them, straight towards the orcs. He announced to Kurok that he and all his relatives were surrounded, but the Duke would give them all a chance to survive. He announced a duel between two chiefs, Aaron and Kuroko. As a result of the duel, the losing race will become slaves. The trigger said that the orc doesn't believe the man. The monster thought that if a person wants to, then all his orcs will be killed, so people cannot be trusted. Aaron said he swears by his honor as a warrior, and the trigger will do exactly the same. In response to this, the orc said that man has no honor. Aaron was angered by this statement and ordered his army to close their shields again. Hearing this, the trigger growled in displeasure and agreed to a duel. He told Aaron to keep his promise, but after that, the trigger with a huge wooden bat in his hands ran to attack the Duke. He intended to kill a man without starting a duel. The orc hit Aaron with all his might so that the ground on which he was standing crumbled in different directions. But after the dust cloud dissipated, it became clear that Aaron was standing as before, completely unharmed. This angered the orc and he attacked Aaron again. However, the Duke managed to dodge again and it seemed that he didn't even do anything for it. Aaron thought to himself that, apparently, the blessing of the dragon felt that way. The old man has not yet fully mastered the Duke's body, however, it feels as if it reacts to the orc's attacks by itself. After Aaron once again dodged the orc's club, the trigger called the Duke a coward. This angered Aaron and hurt his dignity. After that, Aaron took the sword in his hands, threw it on the ground and called the chicken a dirty pig, said he would teach him manners. Rommel in horror shouted to his lord with a question about why he threw his sword. In response, the Duke told Rommel not to worry, because he would definitely teach this monster a good lesson. The orc growled, saying that there is honor in a man and decided that in this case, he would also drop his weapon. The trigger said that he would break a man with his own hands. Looking at the duel between Aaron and Kurok, Rommel thought that no matter how strong a person was, anyone without a weapon would lose to an orc. This happens because orcs grow up in battles all their lives. They are stronger than most people. Rommel noticed that even the claws of the orcs have become sharper, and his lord is not even wearing gloves. The trigger was preparing to strike Aaron. And at the moment when he began to put his hand on the Duke's face, Aaron wondered why the orc was moving so slowly, because Aaron was only concentrating on him. Aaron dodged the orc's blow, but found himself wondering how hard the monster would hit. Therefore, when the trigger once again prepared his fist to hit Aaron, he did not dodge. The orc barely grazed Aaron's cheek and he thought that the blow was not at all sick, as expected. The warriors behind Aaron whispered. It seemed to them that their lord was really being defeated and they began to think about what would happen to them if Aaron really lost. The trigger shouted that he would make all people his slaves. The monster growled and then his entire army roared. But suddenly Aaron ordered the monster to be silent. With great speed, Aaron moved from his place and attacked Kurok. He hit him in the face with great force and he flew to the ground. The trigger stood up and shouted that the man was using magic and then asked Aaron about where his honor was. But he only dealt another blow to Kuroko with such force that he flew back to the shields of the army of people, but bounced away from them towards Aaron. He grabbed the orc's head with his hands and began to strike even more blows. While doing all this, Aaron said that today it is the orcs who will become slaves of people. Unable to withstand such oppression and attacks from Aaron, the orc began to beg for mercy. Aaron took pity on the chicken. After that, the enslavement of the orcs was successfully completed. Aaron was standing on the roof of one of the walls of the orc city. In his hands he held a rope with which the trigger was tied. The Duke was addressing the orcs. He said that he was not going to kill them yet, but from now on they would become slaves of people. A crowd of orcs watched Aaron. He shouted that from that day on, the orcs would work on Bran's lands. For this, Aaron will give them the right to hunt in the nearby forests, and if their tasks are completed, then people will even share their food with the orcs. However, if even one orc tries to stage a mutiny, Aaron will kill them all completely. The Duke warned the monsters that he would wring the neck of each of the orcs standing in front of him with his own hands. Aaron asked the orcs if they understood his terms, but the crowd remained silent in response. After that, Aaron grabbed the chicken by the head, raised it higher and said that if the crowd remained silent, then Aaron would do the same with him as with the leader. After that, the orcs shouted that they understood everything and they heard a man. After that, Aaron said that in return for his time spent and as punishment for all their actions, people would take food from the orcs' reserves for themselves. Aaron's army entered the walls of the land of Bran. People cheered when they greeted the warriors led by Duke Aaron, his sister Cheryl, Rommel and strategist Kinus. The people praised the Duke for the fact that the soldiers returned victorious and they defeated the orcs. Everyone was happy. Aaron ordered Rommel to bring the orcs. In the dungeon, Cheryl made a portal through which all the orcs found themselves in the snow-covered lands. Aaron used a great swordsmanship technique called piercing wind and crushed all the mountains around. The orcs watching were horrified by Aaron's strength. The orcs bowed on their knees to Aaron, while he spoke about how from that day on they would serve the great dragon power. Aaron ordered the orcs to raise their heads and remember what Aaron alone did to these mountains and the city. He told the orcs to always remember their place in this world. The next day, Aaron called Kurok to him. He bowed to Aaron on one knee and said that I swear not to reveal the Duke's power to him, and if they try to take revenge, the trigger will stop them. Aaron told Kurok to remember that if at least one orc tries to do something, Aaron will destroy their entire species. The orcs fled back to the dungeon while Kinus approached Aaron. He told the Duke that he was really able to subdue the orcs and that was commendable. Aaron said that apparently the orcs mistook him for a dragon and that made the task easier. Kinus laughed and asked Aaron what he meant by the word dragon. He told Aaron about whether he knew that dragons never forgive those who pretend to be one of them. In response, Aaron waved his hands and said that Kinus misunderstood him. Aaron said that he didn't even mention the dragon. And apparently, the orcs were imagining something for themselves, and the Duke did not interfere with the flight of their imagination. Kinus laughed and said that it turns out the orcs were just scared of Aaron's strength. To which he replied that Kinus was right and his strength was comparable to that of a dragon. Kinus asked Aaron about what he said, but he changed the subject. Aaron said he would call a meeting in about an hour and asked Kinus to tell the others about the orcs. He said he would carry out the Duke's order. The old man in the body of Duke Aaron walked and thought that his lord with such strength would be able to protect both his lands and his subjects. And even if I couldn't, I would have to at least try. The old man was surprised that the promise to the last king was so important. After that, the old man thought that he was not Aaron anyway and was not going to follow these promises in the same way as nobles do. His main task now is to protect his subjects and the lands of Bran. The old man decided that he would definitely prepare for a battle with the king, which would solve everything. At the duchy's post-war meeting, Aaron said that they had successfully completed the military campaign against the orcs without a single loss, and all thanks to strategist Kinus. Cheryl's sister, hearing these words, seemed offended and angry that her brother did not mention her, but did not say anything out loud. Kinus also said that he was pleased to hear Duke Aaron's praise, but without his lord, nothing would have happened anyway. Suddenly Cheryl's sister couldn't stand it and told everyone to shut up. She asked angrily and shouted about why no one was praising her, because she bravely blew up the orcs with all her magic. In response, Aaron asked Cheryl about who asked her to blow up everyone there. The Duke said that his sister had killed a huge number of orcs, which they could enslave and pump to death with work. In response, the sister began to mimic her brother and pouted resentfully. Aaron continued his speech, summing up everything that happened. He said that now the land available to them has increased fivefold and the Duke believes that it is time to discuss the effective use of these lands. Aaron suggested dungeon development. Everyone in the room, including Rommel, looked at Aaron questioningly and asked him what he meant by these words. A man named Max, who is the administrator of the duchy and part-time spy from the poor aristocracy, asked his lord if he was really going to use the dungeons to lure tourists. Aaron turned to Kinus and asked him if he had made a plan. He replied that he was too busy, but still managed to fulfill the order of his lord. He placed a large scroll on the table and said that this was the main plan of the project called Dungeon Opening and Development. Kinus unfolded a huge scroll. He was so long that he didn't have enough table. Aaron got up from his chair and praised Kinus for the excellent job he had done. But later he added that this plan misses two important details. Kinus, in fear, asked his lord about what he had missed. Aaron shouted that they would probably frame the adventurers, forcing them on the verge of life and death to sign a contract that would force them to be his slaves. Suddenly Max shouted that making people his slaves would have a bad effect on the reputation of Aaron, who is also an aristocrat. In response, Aaron said that he didn't care about his reputation since it was more important for him not to die of hunger. He also added that even aristocrats are human and like all the Lord's subjects, without food Aaron will also die. Suddenly Kinus laughed. He apologized and said that his lord was perfectly able to go beyond simple logic, and this made Kinus laugh. He also said that it was a shame for him that he, the strategist of Kinus, did not understand his master's intentions. He said that he would definitely add to the plan a treacherous setup of adventurers. Max grabbed his head with his hands and called everything that was happening madness, because at this rate the duchy will definitely come to an end. The next day, Aaron went out into the city. He asked the old man if he was really engaged in urban sanitation. The old man said in fear that he was 100% sure that they would not starve to death under Aaron's command, and therefore he would gladly use the entire budget of Bran's lands postponed for the winter, for the sake of the cleanliness of the city. In response to this, Aaron said that the food seemed to be there and besides, they had savings. In response to this, the old man laughed and asked about the savings in question. The old man said that this money was spent on equipment for the war with the orcs, because it could not fall from the sky. After that, the old man summed up that in his opinion such a cleaning of the city would be enough and there was no need to spend the castle budget on it anymore. In response to this, Aaron got angry and said that he had told the old man 100 times that cleaning was not needed for beauty, but so that people would not get sick. For this reason, you need to clean the city all the time. Aaron ordered the old man to pay the workers with food obtained after the war with the orcs. The old man sighed wearily and said that all of them would soon come to an end. Aaron looked at the city and thought that at this rate they would really run out of food and there would be no sanitation. The Duke was thinking about how to solve such a difficult task. At that moment, one of the subjects of Rommel's capital told him that some nun was again illegally arranging treatment. Aaron was interested in this woman. Rommel looked at the crowd of people and told Aaron that, apparently, it was again a nun of their Vivian order treating the people. Aaron reflected on the fact that, according to his recollections, the Vivian order is a religious order that should soon disappear under the pressure of the Perse order. Suddenly it dawned on Aaron that the girl was treating people. One of Rommel's subordinates began shouting at the people that this was unacceptable, because no one allowed them to use religious magic. The people quickly dispersed, and the members of the Vivian order began to hide. One of the members of the order apologized and said that she did not know about such a ban. She said that in that case they would leave. At that moment, people shouted from the crowd. One man begged the priestess to cure his little son, otherwise he would die. Another old man shouted that if Rommel's subjects expel priestesses, then let them at least build a hospital for the people, because this girl somehow helps people and they do not understand why the knights expel her. Another man from the crowd approached the warrior and asked him if he was ready to answer for the death of his son. The girl tried to stop the fight. She said she would come back to them, so people should just wait. Suddenly someone loudly shouted enough, and everyone fell silent. The people looked in the direction from which the voice was coming. Aaron was standing there. He said the nun could continue. Aaron approached the girl and thanked her for helping his subjects. The Duke also added that he has no reason to expel the girl from the city and he personally allows her to help his people. People joyfully began to rejoice. The girl at first did not believe in the words of the Duke and then thanked him for such an opportunity. Aaron was embarrassed and looked away. He said that the nuns could continue the treatment, and the girl needed to go after him. Aaron walked and thought that he didn't care about religion because free treatment is more important. He laughed inwardly and thought that he would make them all plow until they died of fatigue. As soon as Aaron and the nun arrived at the duchy's meeting room, the girl threw herself around Aaron's neck with a hug. Aaron began to push the girl away from him and wondered if she didn't know that holy virgins are deprived of God's blessing when they touch men. The girl knelt down in front of Aaron and asked him if he really wanted to build a temple. Aaron began to drink tea and said that he really wanted to do it and saw no reason not to build a temple. The girl was very happy, but suddenly an old man appeared who said that they could not build a temple because they simply did not have the money for it. And if they build it, then they will have absolutely nothing left in the treasury. Aaron said he knew all this, but they must have had hidden savings somewhere. In response to this, the old man angrily shouted that the last emperor had left this money to Aaron in order to use it as a last resort. In response to this, the Duke shouted that the extreme case had come. The old man quietly bowed to his Duke and said that he would do his bidding. The girl began to thank Duke Aaron endlessly for such a decision, but the man stopped her and said that for such generosity he had one condition for the Order of Vivian. The girl asked about the condition. Aaron said that his condition is the production of holy water. The Duke said that according to the rumors that reached him, holy water can be created directly in the temple. Aaron asked the girl if she was ready to promise her help in the development of the lands of Bran and the production of holy water in exchange for the construction of a temple. The girl happily agreed and said that she would fulfill her promise. Aaron asked the girl what if they had to produce as much holy water as Aaron wanted. In response to this, the girl agreed again. A few weeks later, Kinus ran up to his Duke and reported that the orcs had discovered a hidden dungeon and it was located near their fortress. Aaron asked Kinus about which dungeon he was talking about. Kinus said that according to Kurok, this is some kind of long-abandoned place. In response to this, Aaron asked about whether this was mentioned in any ancient writings and whether this place has no owner at all. Kinus replied that they had found absolutely nothing. He also added that, apparently, now this dungeon has become a den of a wide variety of creatures. The strategist asked his lord if they would develop such a place, because it is difficult for Kinus to imagine how adventurers can be lured there. Aaron thought that no one would believe that a high-ranking dungeon just appeared, even if they made it out of an abandoned one. Suddenly Aaron remembered the nun. The Duke laughed and said that he had come up with a great idea and had found a way to lure adventurers there. Aaron said that they would spread a rumor about the elixir of eternal life, which could supposedly be found there. Kinus said they didn't have anything like that, but in response to this, the Duke said that they actually had one such thing at their disposal and called the strategist to follow him. Arriving at the temple, Kinus saw how the girl treats people and was very surprised. He can't understand what kind of glow it is, what kind of divine power that literally bursts out of the girl's body. Kinus could not understand where this creature came from in these lands. The girl immediately ran towards her master as soon as she heard his footsteps. A strong light emanated from the girl, which blinded Kinus's eyes, but he very soon realized that people did not feel this divine power. The girl immediately threw herself on her master's neck, but he moved aside and she fell on the grass. Aaron asked the girl how her business was going. Privately, the Duke thought that he should not forget that Cecilia is a cheap producer of holy water for Aaron. The girl said that as the Duke can see, they have almost finished the construction of the temple. Aaron said that he came to find out about the holy water and asked the girl if she could already create it. In response to this, the girl said that she certainly has such an opportunity. The girl sat down on her knees and began to pray. She turned to the goddess Vivian and said that her devoted servant had come with a plea. The girl asked to give her a particle of her energy and create a miracle. After that, the water in the bowl in front of the statue of Vivian lit up. All the people standing and watching were shocked. The dragon thought that this was impossible, because this force is inhuman and, apparently, Cecilia is a direct descendant of the goddess. The dragon wondered if the girl hadn't woken up yet. Aaron filled the bucket with water and told the old man to try the water, because he is the oldest and sickest of all those present and the effect will be most noticeable on him. The old man took the ladle in his hands with skepticism. He said that he did not believe that simple water could cure, unlike real medicines. The old man took a sip of water and immediately felt 5 years younger. Now he could jump, do somersaults and almost sit on the splits. Cecilia asked Aaron if her water was better than real medicine. The girl took the guy by the hand and began to stroke. Aaron panicked and began to push the girl away from him. The Duke thought that he just needed to pour some holy water into the dungeon and spread the rumor about the source of eternal life there. But he also noted that the effectiveness of this water is amazing. The guy decided that in this case it was necessary to keep Cecilia. He made a reservation and corrected himself, his cheap producer of holy water, as close to himself as possible. At this time, the girl was still standing close to Aaron, and it was clear from the Duke's face that he was embarrassed by such attention from the girl and he was embarrassed. Aaron called Kinus to him. The Duke whispered to his strategist about how hard it would be to spread such a rumor about the elixir. Kinus replied that he was sure there was no such powerful holy water anywhere else. The strategist also added that, of course, water does not grant eternal life, but even this effect is enough for adventurers. Aaron said that since everything was ready, in that case it would be time for them to go to the dungeon. Suddenly Cecilia ran up to her master and said that she had just remembered that she would like to introduce him to someone. Aaron was surprised and asked the girl who she was talking about. Cecilia replied that she wanted to introduce the man to the captain of the Holy Knights of her order. Aaron was surprised and asked the girl if he had heard that the Vivian Order had Holy Knights. It turned out that the Order of the Holy Knights really exists. And, unlike other specialized warriors, they are responsible for defense. These people dedicate their bodies to the divine in order to withstand and repel absolutely any kind of attacks. If such knights unite together, then their defense will not be inferior in strength even to a fortress. However, Cecilia sighed sadly and said that they only had one of the knights left. Aaron asked the girl if the captain would come to them. Suddenly, someone called out to Aaron, calling him a red-haired boy. The Duke looked in the direction from which the voice came and saw a girl in armor there. She told Aaron to stop crowding their saint, because he was not worthy to stand even close to her. The Duke looked offended at the knight. She continued talking and said that she came only because the Holy Virgin decided to build a temple in the lands of Bran. She called this place dead, with weak people and a useless duke, just a pathetic sight. At that moment Cecilia flew up to the knight and calling her Lady Bianca said that she could not talk to her master like that, because it was rude. Aaron, with a calm voice, asked the girl what she meant when she called his people weak. Bianca replied that she really considered their people weak and added that she was ready to obey only the strongest. In response, Aaron, with the same calm face and even a little bored, asked the girl about how many people she had already obeyed in her entire life. The girl shouted that so far no one has been awarded such an honor, because no one will be able to match her strength. Aaron smiled and asked the girl if she wanted to make a bet. Bianca was surprised and asked Aaron what he meant. He replied that the loser of the bet would receive 3 strong blows from the winner and after that they would see if Bianca would obey the Duke of Bran's land. Bianca looked at the Duke with contempt and called him an infirm brat. The knights stood around Aaron and Bianca, while they stood opposite each other and prepared for battle. One of the knights said that it hurt him to watch a battle in which the winner is obvious. Another replied to him that the master had defeated that orc Kirok with the help of the magic of deafening sleep and even fought without a sword. The third knight asked what would happen if Aaron or Bianca were to get badly hurt during the fight. The first replied that they had nothing to do but pray. Aaron bent down to the ground to pick up a thin branch. Bianca was offended and angry, because the Duke was going to fight against her with a branch from a tree. In response, Aaron laughed it off and told the branch not to listen to the bad ant. At that moment Bianca turned to the goddess Vivian and asked her to give her the strength to crush her enemies. Aaron asked the girl why she had been preparing for the attack for so long. Was she really afraid of the stick? The girl got angry and shouted at the Duke to shut up. The girl began to attack Aaron with all her might, but he stopped her with just a stick. Bianca bounced off Aaron and flew into the wall. In response to this, Aaron, with a grin and mockery, asked the girl if one blow of a branch was enough for her. After that, the Duke hit Bianca with a branch again and her shield began to crumble. As a result, he completely broke into small pieces. The girl fell to her knees and bowed to Aaron. At that moment, the Duke said that according to the conditions that they both remember, the loser must withstand 3 strong blows from the opponent. He ordered Bianca to expose herself. The Duke dealt Bianca 3 blows with a stick while all the knights were watching. After that, Aaron announced that the punishment was over and told Bianca that she would never dare to insult him on his own land again. The girl sighed, barely gathered the strength to get up from the ground and turned to Aaron. She said that no one had ever humiliated her so cruelly and asked the Duke to make her his own. But before the girl could finish, Cecilia closed her mouth. Aaron was surprised by such a request from the captain of the order and asked her about what she said. Cecilia continued to close Bianca's mouth and laughed and said that the captain of the Order of the Holy Knights must have been slightly carried away by reading her favorite novels. Aaron was still standing in surprise and did not understand what kind of novels Bianca was reading. The Duke ordered Rommel to assemble a warrior to clear the dungeon. Aaron stood in front of his warriors. He turned to Kinus and said that by removing the soldiers needed to protect the borders, they had only 100 warriors left, which is too little. In response to this, Kinus said that only 5,000 people live on the land of Bran and by law they mobilize every 10th, so it turns out that a large army needs a huge population, which the lands of Bran do not have. After that, Kinus said that even if they suddenly have new residents, they will not have enough resources to feed them. Aaron thought about it and realized that in order to attract more residents, it is necessary to first improve living conditions. Kinus said he would try to find a way to fix their deplorable situation. Aaron agreed with the strategist. Suddenly, Aaron realized something. He decided that if he was not mistaken, then just at this time there would be many refugees in the territory of Count Grey and Count Ammon. Kinus noticed that his master was thinking and asked him what he thought. At that moment, Aaron realized that it was time for him to give his speech to the warriors. Aaron began to say that, as they had all already heard, they were going to go to the dungeon. He also added that they would clean up everything there and take the treasures with them. After that, the warriors led by Aaron headed to the dungeon. There were orcs at the entrance to it. They bowed to their overlord and greeted him. Aaron asked the orcs about how it went there. Suddenly, the trigger said something had happened. After that, they headed to the second floor of the dungeon in the Holy Lands of Atuna. The orc pointed to his brothers lying on the ground and said that they had become some kind of strange. Cheryl asked others about whether everyone feels this strange cold that she feels. These orcs stood up and looked at the people. Their eyes were glowing purple. The orcs headed towards the humans and were going to attack them. The trigger shouted for his brothers to stop, otherwise Aaron would kill them all and beat off the orcs from the Lord with a club. They fell and crashed into the wall. Some kind of black spirit flew out of them. Kinus warned everyone to be careful, because these are ghosts. The ghost flew through Kurok's baton, despite the fact that he was trying to protect his master. The ghost flew to Aaron, but with the help of the sword was able to repel the attack. A bunch of ghosts surrounded the people in the dungeon. Cheryl thought that she would still have nightmares about these creatures. The girl released a fireball from her magic staff and it crushed several ghosts. Rommel called out to Mrs. Cheryl and asked her for help, since neither he nor the trigger can harm these ghosts in any way. After that, Kinus said that he forgot to mention that only magic can hurt ghosts. Rommel said that such an important detail could have been said earlier. Cheryl ordered everyone to stay put and not move. After that, she released another stream of fire from her staff towards the ghosts, and they flew away. After that, they gathered into one lump and let out a long howl, so loud that everyone in the dungeon had to cover their ears. After that, one huge ghost reappeared and Aaron cut it with his sword, charged with the fire of his sister Cheryl. Kinus said that apparently the ghost stayed in this place for a reason, because maybe they even guarded something. Cheryl called out to her brother to come to her. The girl was holding a book in her hands and reading it. After her brother approached her, she showed him the title of the book, which read The Legacy of the Ancients. The girl was reading a book and said that during the time of the Dragon Empire there was a temple of some group of monks in this place, and she also saw about the training of spiritual power. Aaron asked about what these workouts are. Cheryl began to read that unlike magicians using external force, these monks were able to know the power of a different nature, spiritual. Aaron said that this is the first time he hears about inner strength. In fact, the external power of magicians is a vessel that is filled with mana and they receive it from birth, and spiritual power is a vessel that can be increased and changed. Aaron turned to Kinus and asked him if he had ever heard of such art. The man replied that it was quite entertaining. He added that if everything is exactly as explained by Mrs. Cheryl, then thanks to the training of the spirit, even an ordinary person would be able to use magic. Aaron asked Kinus if this meant that his soldiers could also master this magic. Kinus cautiously replied that even if this was the case, he thought it was not worth trying it yet. Aaron asked about why Kinus thinks so. He replied that if you examine the dungeon, you can see blood and traces of endless struggle everywhere. Kinus suggested that the training of this force is so inhuman, or the force itself is so dangerous that in the end they all just killed each other. Aaron thought about it, looked at the book and said that he would hide this thing for now. At this time, on the third level of the dungeon, Aaron and other people were destroying the dungeon and found a chest with a lot of gold. Aaron said that since they were done, the trigger would take only half of the gold in the chest and leave the rest in it. Kinus turned to Aaron and said that he would like to take half of the gold. Aaron asked him why he needed this gold. Kinus said that since this dungeon is pretty simple, it will be difficult to put adventurers in a critical position. Aaron thought about it and agreed with Kinus. He went on to say that therefore, With the help of this gold, he will be able to add several additions to the dungeon. Aaron asked Kinus about what additions he wanted to make. As a result, the orcs built a maze in it under the guidance of Kinus. He looked at the work done by the orcs and said that when the foundation of the labyrinth is done, he is an ancient dragon, orders all the dead to rise. After that, he added a couple of torches and a well with magic water. Kinus tasted the water, said that it had a good taste and it would prolong life for about a year. It only remained to find greedy customers. The adventurers crowded in front of the gate leading to the entrance to the dungeon. One of the adventurers noted that it was pouring like a bucket and thought about when this winter would end. He also noted that all the guards in this place are dressed in brand new armor. Another adventurer suggested that maybe they found something in this new dungeon, such as an artifact. But girl also added that if things are different, then she does not understand why so much spending was needed. After that, the adventurer pointed to the tavern and asked the girl if it was also an unnecessary waste in her opinion. The man noted that other buildings are still under construction, and the tavern looks like new. The adventurer said that this means that they are happy to wait for people like them. Or more precisely, they are waiting for gold, which they will spend in this tavern on alcohol and food. The second adventurer said that if this is the entrance fee to the dungeon, then he will spend quite a lot of money there. After that, the adventurers entered the tavern and the owner greeted the adventurer, calling him by name Gerald. The man also greeted the owner in response and asked him how many people he had robbed to rebuild such a good and beautiful tavern. But there is also a hotel on the second floor. The owner replied that he had by no means robbed anyone and all the money had been borrowed. After that, he changed the subject and asked the adventurers if they had heard that a new dungeon had appeared, because of which many adventurers would soon get into his tavern. Because of this, the man recommended that young people hurry up while there is time. Gerald said he didn't expect to be rushed and he laughed. The adventurer looked around, took out a gold coin from his pocket, handed it to the owner of the tavern and asked him what he knew about the new dungeon. He replied that he had heard rumors about the source of eternal life, but so far these adventurers are the first who are going there. After that, Gerald gave the owner of the tavern another gold coin and thanked him for the information provided and added that he never lets him down. He asked the owner to bring him something to eat because they want to enrich this tavern. The next day, in the morning, Aaron was sitting in the lotus position. A book was opened in front of him in which he read about spiritual power. The Duke thought that he could only use the blessing of the dragon in full force so far, and Kinus correctly noted that these teachings could be dangerous, but Aaron needed his own strength, his personal one. At that moment, Cecilia came up to Aaron and disturbed his meditation. Aaron was startled by the surprise and asked the girl about what had happened and what she needed from him. Cecilia said that she came in order to somehow express her feelings for him. The girl handed the guy a plate with sandwiches on it. Aaron took this plate, but suddenly one of the warriors came running to him in order to give it, and so Cecilia left. The warrior informed his master that the adventurers had arrived. In response, the joyful Aaron asked the warrior about how many slaves there were. The next day, a crowd of adventurers rushed to the dungeon called the Source of Atuna. The adventurer noticed a sign that said that the entrance fee was 10 gold. The girl paid her money, and in response to this, she was handed a payment paper and told not to lose it, since it is her pass to the dungeon. Gerald wanted to enter the dungeon, but the soldiers blocked his entrance and told him that it was impossible to enter the dungeon without paper. Gerald started to say something, but the soldiers interrupted him and reminded him again that you need to pay 10 gold to enter. Other adventurers began to mutter discontentedly and say that this was robbery. Another said that with this money you can feed a family for 3 months and this is some kind of divorce. After that, the warrior announced that he was now declaring the words of the owner of the Bran lands, Duke Aaron. You can always earn 10 gold. But the elixir of eternal life can be exhausted at any moment. Decide for yourself what is more expensive to you. After that, Gerald took out a bag of money from his pocket and handed it to the warrior. After the adventurers entered, they were told that there are many dead people living in the dungeon and if they want to overcome them, they only need a special holy water, which costs 1 gold apiece. Gerald said that he already had water and showed a bottle with it. The one who sold the water said that it was water from the Church of Paris and called the adventurers poor devils who do not know that the holy water of the Vivian Church is much stronger. Gerald stopped, thought, gave the seller a few gold coins and took the water. The seller thanked him and took the money. He also started trying to sell magic equipment and Gerald asked to see it. After that, Gerald saw a sign that said that an emergency rescue request costs 100 gold coins per person. The seller gave Gerald some artifact and began to assure him that this was not a divorce. The man said that this is a special artifact designed specifically for adventurers and with only 100 gold pieces he can save his life. Gerald asked about what would happen if they didn't make the request. In response to this, the seller said that then no one would take money from them. Gerald thought that if they really found the source of eternal life there, they would get rich 10 times more than they would spend here. After that, all the adventurers finally entered the dungeon. At this moment, Aaron and Kinus were happily watching the adventurers enter the dungeon. Aaron called Kurok and told him that the holy water would simplify the battle with ghosts too much for adventurers, and therefore, the Duke asks the orc to go to the dungeon and heat up the situation there. At this time, on the second floor of the dungeon, The adventurer was using ice arrows to fight monsters and fight her way to the source. Gerald thought that if they didn't have this holy water, then everything would be much more complicated. The adventurers, led by Gerald, stood near the stairs and wondered if it led to the last floor. Suddenly, more ghosts flew towards the adventurers, who were already ready to attack them. One of the men shouted at them that they were stupid creatures and threw a bottle of holy water at them. She crashed into the ghost, but did nothing. As a result, the ghost attacked the man and he flew down the stairs. The other adventurers were scared. They realized that these were mutant ghosts and Gerald ordered everyone else to get weapons. However, after that, several more ghosts ran out. Gerald got scared, said there were too many monsters and ordered all the other people to run. After that, the orcs pulled off their blue cloaks, which made it seem that they were ghosts.